I got the second house series now. Second house in astrology has to do with what you value. You know, are you one that values their, money, values, having their shit together, taking care of themselves, loving themselves? Are you one that, does shit for other people? You're gonna put yourself second. You're gonna not make sure you have your shit taken care of. You're gonna value other things like, you know, not even things, just being around other people and, having, fun with them. That's the shit you value. You might value a deep conversation or depth in a relationship. You might value, you know, more conversations than things. It depends on the sign and it depends on that, right? But today I'm talking about the sun in the second house. So that's you valuing yourself, your ego, who you are. You value yourself above other things. You don't care how other people, view because you know that you put time and energy into yourself, in different ways, because each sign has a different way of doing it, right? So if you got the sun in the second house and you're an Aries, you are going to value your outgoingness. You're going to value challenging people, competition. That's what you value. You value that. You value worthy opponents, worthy rivals, in any type of way. That could be physical, that could be mental. You're an Aries, so you like that. That keeps you wanting to, strive for better. You don't like the slow shit. You don't like that, right? But you value, you know, if I can challenge somebody, if I can go to the gym every day and they're there with me, I'm being pushed to lift more than that guy. I'm being pushed to run faster than that guy. I'm being pushed to make more tackles than that guy. Or if you're a female, I'm, out here, showing up to work, doing what I gotta do. I'm listening to what the boss has to say. She's not doing that, but I'm on my shit. I'm, taking notes. I'm, doing that, and you're competing with the people around you, and you see it as a competition. You do see it that way, you know, and then you also value, you know, like you really do value yourself. You kind of, you get an ego sometimes, and you're like, everybody else ain't doing enough. You know, you lack the drive, the passion to do things. You start to see that in other people because you, as an Aries who has it in the second house, you value that so much. So then when you see somebody who ain't like that, you're gonna be like, whoa, like, what are you like doing? Are you doing anything for yourself? Are you challenging yourself? Are you, you know, trying to become a better person? Are you pushing yourself? Are you competing against other people to like show that you're, like that? This person does things like that. It ain't really about the money or the like, you know, conversations about what are we gonna do, and we're gonna see who's better, you or me. They value competition. They value people who put their like effort into themselves. You're gonna attack what you want. You ain't gonna you know sit around and not do anything and be inactive on some shit. You're gonna attack shit right away. You're gonna be aggressive about how you go about doing things. They value that type of thing in other people and definitely in themselves. But one who has Taurus in the second house, this is a great placement. Taurus in the second house, Taurus is the second sign of the zodiac, and we said the second house is, what you value. So you are going to be more patient. You're going to be more, You're gonna value that. You're gonna value, I have to do things to make sure I have a, strong foundation, but for myself, it's like what you value. I like you could see what other people are doing and you don't gravitate towards that, but you're gonna make sure you have your shit together. You're gonna make sure you're, financially stable, getting towards that. You're gonna be patient about that shit, if you have to be, but you're gonna like be more focused on and put value towards, am I all right? Do I feel like I have enough, money to, keep me afloat? Do I want to, you know, do I have enough things? Because this is tourist, right? Do I have enough things to, keep me satisfied and living this life? You know, I value, money and possessions, but that's not a bad thing. You know, other people might think of that, but I don't. I'm like, you just want to make sure you're taken care of first and foremost. And then you also understand that people, judge you based off of like your standing. You can be a person that's, all, fun and great with people and all that stuff, right? But at the end of the day, people will look at you and be like, where are you at in life as far as, your, standing and shit. Do you have a job? Do you, you know, have your finances in order? Do you have what you want, the things you want? Do you, have those things because you worked hard for them and other things? And that's what you value. And you value people who will work towards their goals for themselves. You know, you like when you see somebody who's, didn't have it easy. It took them a while, you know, but they eventually made it, big, came up on some money, came up on that house they always wanted, came up on that, car they always wanted. They had all that shit because they were patient, they stayed consistent, they worked on, themselves, you know, and it also comes down to, taking care of yourself in like physical ways. Are you exercising? Are you, being active on things? You know, maybe you ain't, loud about it, but some things don't need to be, it's just there, and you understand that, because like again, you value things, you value money, you value having what you want because you deserve it. You put the time and energy and effort into you. So, whereas others wouldn't, others would, go out and get by with other people, go out and, you know, fuck around, go out and lose their ass. You ain't gonna do that. You want yourself to be, on point, taken care of, you know, stable, secure. And, that's a great thing to value. You know, and Gemini, sun in the second house, right? You value the way you communicate with people. You value the conversations you have with, the people around you. Even if it ain't a friend, you have to have, those conversations, in your day. You don't want to go about your day and be like not talking to people. That's a bad day for you. You like to communicate, but you don't like to just communicate with everybody. You might, you know, but you value those conversations that, go places. We have ideas about, what's going on in the area. I want to know. I want to know. You want to know what's going on. You know, that's why you value the conversations. You can't not know what the fuck's going on. You know, and you won't be secure. You'll be like, what? I haven't talked to anybody today, so I don't know what's going on. I know what I know, but I want to like see if I want to confirm some things. I want to run some things by people I care about or love. You know, so that they have the information that I know. Because I've done research too. Because you also like to read books too. You'll value shit like that. You know, and and that's a good thing to value. Intelligence. Um, Conversations that aren't so grandiose, but are ways to improve upon what's there in society and people, and how can we make this better for people, how can I make my life better with you. you know I want to talk to you about some things because we haven't talked in a while. you know you value conversations with people, um and you might value being um the one who's talking more. You need somebody there who wants to listen to you, that type of deal. Sometimes, other people can't get a word in because you want to be the one who's like, hey, I know about this, and this, and I took notes, and I understand that or I know that you are, you know, not hip to, what's going on, and you're just running information by somebody who really doesn't want to hear it, or didn't ask for that type of information, but you need that yourself. Like you just value yourself that much, and you need that. You're like, I am one who's intelligent. I am one who, you know, studies things and does research and questions things a little bit, you know. And then sometimes you play games with things because you are, you know, a good word player sometimes. You can convince others of all kind of shit because you have a clear voice and clear conscience, right? But you value conversations and, being around people and talking to them and letting them know what you know. Because at the end of the day, you're a smart individual, or you're a person who can take in information and give it out. Basically, that's the main thing. You're a person who can take in information and give it out to them. But a Cancer in the second house, Cancer Sun in the second house, you value, you know, your family, your home, the people that you really connect with on a deep level. It might not be your family, for some people, but for you, typically it is their family. They still, you know, understand or have the deeper understanding that we not might not see eye to eye on some things, but at the end of the day, I care about them, and I want to know what's going on, if they're doing all right or not, you know, and like it's the ones you're close with, typically, and you care about and value that with other people. You value a friend who's also like you, and really likes to be connected to the ones they care about. They'll talk to you about, oh, well, me and this person have been through this and this, situation, and we work through things, and we're still together, and those deeper relationships. You care about people who, and you value people who are also like you in that way. You know, People who aren't, about their family or about having deeper connections with other people, who are a bit, I don't know, just don't seem like they want to, get to know people on a deeper level. You don't really value that. You don't like that. You know, you don't like people who don't try to like get to know people on a deeper level, and find out what's really going on with the person. You know, because you can tell when somebody's upset. Even when they're like not. And you value those type of interactions with people. You know, you like to be a nurturer and listen to people's life stories and shit like that. Sometimes you don't, but you also you do though, because guess what? You then get to be that person that they, see in a good way. I would never talk to anybody else about this type of thing because other people don't give a fuck about, all the pain I've went through in this relationship, or I've had this type of, trauma from my past, and you, will listen to things like that and give me feedback on, how you what I've told you about me made you feel. And we can actually have a deeper connection with each other. We could be friends. We could be, all kinds of things. Yeah, we could fuck around together and have fun. We could, come closer. As people. You don't like people who don't like to be connected on a deeper level. The surface shit does not, satisfy you. You like to, you know, understand people's emotions and why they do what they do. Where does that stem from? Why? Why? You know, that's what you value. It's not the things, it's not the conversation necessarily. It's the am like how did you become the person you are today? And you see that shit a lot. What drove you to, or made you, like, who in your past made you who you are. Who do you have deep ties to? That type of thing. You value that type of thing in life. And then you also, once, people have told you things, you might think you know that person because they've told you, where they came from and other things. But you also got to understand that, people change too. So they might have, done that in the past and that in the past and, been through all this and that. But that don't mean you know them. They could be, right now not like that, They could be a completely different person. They have transformed, they have done other things, you know. Because you can then be like, later, be like, oh, that's my friend so and so, and he's been through this and that, and he's a person who's, very, this and that. But, maybe they ain't. Maybe they, told you a story and you just like got deeply emotionally connected to what they were saying because, it resonated with you on a deeper level. You gotta watch out, Leo in the second house. This person values themselves in high regard. They value their energy that they present to their friends and loved ones and people in general. They know that they bring a good, vibe to, like, situations typically, or they, and if it ain't that, then they know that they are one that, tries to, you know, keep shit, lively, happy, are you doing all right? Am I, too much for you? I don't really care because I'm trying to bring you in on the fun that I got going on. You know, if you don't like it here, then you shouldn't be here, type of thing. Because I bring a, vibe that is, fun, one that is, I see things and I want to make them happen right there. And I understand, and this person understands that they need, or they like to have people around them who also want to have fun the way they want to have fun. Because these people, this is fixed fire, correct? So they like to, entertain themselves and other people in a specific way, because they see a thing worked out in their mind and they're like, if I have these type of people around me, we're gonna have so much fun and we're gonna, live it up and we're gonna, have the best time. Even if, some other people, come through that I don't really fuck with, we're still gonna have fun, you know, because the people that are there that, really fuck with me, they value me and they value the, creative, energy that I bring to, our friendship, our friend circle. They understand that I'm gonna make it, a great time, no matter what. Even if I have to put off, work or I have to put off, other things to do that, I'm gonna make that happen for my friends. I'm gonna make that happen for me. I need things that are, I need the best everything too. I don't want to settle for the cheapest shit. I want the best. I want lavish. I want the best food, the best house, the best car. That type of thing. I value those type of things. The shit that is like bright and loud, and like you can define their character. I am so and so, and this is what I drive. I drive a $1 million car that is, coated in gold and shit. I'm, so and so who, I do, I have I have a pool in my backyard that's like, pretty big, and we throw parties there every weekend because, I'm that guy in the neighborhood and shit, or I'm that female who, allows, that to happen too. You know, I only surround myself with people who like lift my spirit up because I've lifted their spirit up. That type of deal. You value your grandness, your grand vision. You value, you know, what you seek. The entertainment, the fun. You know, the time with friends and family. You know, um, the fun moments. And creating those fun experiences. You want to be the one that does that and is recognized as that. You want to also, like I said, you want to have the most lavish things, because you feel like you deserve shit like that. I don't just want to, I want limited edition type shit, you know, which is fine and everything, I ain't telling you not to, but, sometimes you might not know what it takes to get that. And then maybe sometimes you do, but then, typically you're one that uses other people or like has other people, having to sacrifice too so that you can then get that. As long as you understand that you have to then, go out for other people too, the people that, look up to you or um, see you as that, kingly or queenly, person that you are, as long as you give back to them and um, listen to what they have to say and like because I say you do value the people that you're around and you do that maybe you're the one who's always like I like to throw parties in the backyard and then like people are like well maybe we should throw a party at my house one time and you can be the one but you're like no 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 it has to be at my place and they've gotten you things and other things you might want to every once in a while be like okay we can throw the party at your house or we can change things up a little bit and like so you just keep them around and stuff because these people because like I said you do value people who view you the way you view yourself and see life similarly to the way you see it um so yeah you know but you can be arrogant at times too so that's one of the downsides to that but every sign has a downside. But Virgo, they value holding themselves to a higher standard, right? We need to do things specifically this way, no half-assing it. Every time we do something, it's to the T, it's to the letter. There's no room for error, and they hold their friends to this, the people they care about, the people that they like, I seen, you didn't quite do your work that well today. That's not a good thing. You gotta, fix that. If I have to fix it, then I'm gonna be in your ass about, you being a half-ass worker or a half-ass, person that, doesn't, value themselves enough to, look their best or, you know, have, you know, everything sorted out to the T. You know, they value themselves for that because they understand that other people don't think like them. They ain't detail oriented people. They ain't good listeners. You're a good listener. You actually are a good listener. And you can listen to something and execute. Other people don't do that. It pisses you off sometimes. It gets on your fucking nerves. You're like, I value that type of, I wake up at this time. I eat at this specific time. I go to work at this specific time. I, put these specific foods into my body. I work with these specific muscle groups. I do this. I do that. It's not that hard. And then to you, it's like nothing that is, it just is. And then, but like sometimes you might, forget that you're such a, good and diligent person. You are to the T about everything, very analytical about stuff, methodical about things that other people are just like stunned and they're like, how can I even like compare to somebody like you? You know, but you're like, you value that in yourself and then you value that in them and you're like trying to teach them like it's not that hard. You have to just, you know, grin and bear it and, you don't want to do that because at the end of the day, and when the day you die, you want people to remember you for like putting you all into the shit you've done. Everything when it comes down to your work, comes down to how you take care of your body, how you take care of your mind, how you feed yourself. You know, you like to be that like one that people look to as a example of like, damn, things should be done this way. That's the standard. That's what we strive for. You can even, worry at times, you know, to yourself. You'd be like, have I, done enough? Maybe you haven't, but maybe you have. Maybe you're thinking too much and you have done enough. Maybe you haven't given time for, um, enough time. Like you still have to be that, detail oriented and analytical person that you are. But maybe you haven't given time to like have fun. You know, maybe you're too caught up in that shit, and that's you need to sit back. But then you don't want to do that because then too much. Because then you can't be that example of you know what to be like. How to be like have mental fortitude is what I like to say with that. You know, we don't like tomfoolery over here too much. This person, you value, people who work, but not just work, but, do things and like pay attention to details and strive to, do better and improve upon, who they are, refine themselves. You like people who are trying to do shit like that. You value those type of people who, have a certain, uh, diet, certain way they work out in the gym, those type of things. People who do things in a specific way. You like that because you're one who can follow all that and be like, oh wow, you take time to like actually plan things out and write shit down and execute upon what you have laid out. You value that type of thing. Um, Now Libra, you value a sun in the first house or second house. My bad. Libra sun in the second house. You value your community and your people. You really focus on that type of thing. If if I'm not good, then nobody else is good, and vice versa. Really, if my neighbor's not doing good, then I'm not doing good. I want to make sure that they're all right to certain degree. They have their food good, their food's good. They're going to the store and they're getting the right food, or they're you know they're making their payments on time. They're doing this, they're doing that. To you're a person that's like, if we're all doing you know good, then we're doing good as a community as a whole. And it gives you mental security too, because then you're like, I know what's on this person's mind all the time because I talk to them every day. Hey, you'll be like, hey, so and so, are you doing good at work? Or you this and that? You just like to chat people up, and not, and it's for your, mental sake. If you don't know what's going on with, somebody around you who's like a neighbor, a friend, then you're like, thinking, you might be thinking the worst sometimes. You know, I want to, like, know a little bit about what's, going on. I like to know my relationships are, cool. You know, I like to know that my, acquaintances are, doing all right. My friends, my family, I'll tell them things. I'll ask them things, you know, I'll let them know what I know about what's going on in the community and what they can do to be better, better themselves if they need that. And if they don't need that, you're just there and you're like, okay, yeah, okay, that's cool. You're doing good for yourself now. That's good. That gives you a sense of you know you now know what's going on with them, so it's good. Because again, you're a one sign, so you have a lot of questions. And if you have those questions and you ain't getting them answered, you're like, you start to get a little bit insecure about things. You're like, oh fuck, I think about this person, but I don't know anything. I have some questions, I need to, answer that I need answers. So I'm gonna, go out and figure it out. You see somebody in your community that's, down and out, you're like, you want to, make sure that they're all right. Or if they're even supposed to be there in the first place, because they might be somebody who's, not cool. You know, you value, the, people in your community. You go out to help them out too. You go out of your way to, talk to them. And even if they need help, you could, give them information to help them out, or you'll, help out, at your local, places and shit, and let them know that, hey, we're giving out food at this place, and, this shit. You know, you want to be a person that, that people can rely on for things, conversations, and, just, being there as a, decent individual. You ain't the best person. Maybe sometimes you think that because you are one that, goes out of their way and shit to like talk to all kind of people, which is a good thing. But then, that's also not a, um, it don't make you better than everybody else. It just makes you a person that, you're more considerate than the next person, you know. Whereas somebody else would just be like, talking to only a few people. You used to talk to anyone. And it's, for yourself. And it's also for them too, because you know things about your community and what's going on in the area. And you just want to make sure that they know too, you know, that these things are there, and, I'm here too. If you want to like talk or, need help with anything, I'm, here, you know. Um, but Scorpio and Sun in the second house, you value, you value people who have guts, people who are willing to do anything to get what they want, or really, because you're the one that likes to be the one that's, willful and like that, who value you, and you value the deeper connections with people, in that type of sense. If you don't have guts to, get what you want, or you don't want to help me in what I got going on, in my goals and ambitions, my desires, then I don't value you. I can't even fuck with you. We might have problems. You might not like somebody because they can't do things for you, or like do what you need them to. Um, you know, Depending on who it is, you might get active on it. But if you just won't fuck with those people. And like for you though, you're a person who has a decent intuition too, so you actually have knowledge of oh well, I knew you, like you'll be like, well, I knew you wouldn't help me out with this type of thing because you're just not that type of person. you know and you might tell that person that when you cut them off, or you might just be like, it's just like you know any other time, but you value a deeper connection, and like how they see you, and like they take note about what you do, and you are the one who is willing to do anything to get what you want. You don't care if you have to step over people, have to do this, do that to get what you want. you know and you like people who value you for being that type of person, because you might not have liked what you had to do, you know to get those things, but at the end of the day you're like, shit must go on, and we must keep moving forward, you know but you still hold, but like you as a person, you still hold on to things from the past because you are a water sign, but you use that as you use the negative energy as fuel to like keep you going, and you don't like people who look at you as like, oh, you're gonna get upset and bitch about things because I don't want to submit to what you got going on and like how you want to do things. you know you don't like that, but you like people who are like, oh, it must have taken a lot to get to this point and all this other things. You seem like a interesting person, I want to stick around you. And then you like those people who stick around even when you're like you know not showing your best side, when you're showing your negative side. You like those people who can be there for your good and bad. You value those type of deep connections. you know I might be aggressive towards certain things that piss me off, or I might be um not willing to hang around these type of people. I ain't gonna talk to like a lot of people. I only talk to a few people. um and that's fine with the person that you like, but you like value those deeper connections. The people who like know you for you're good and you're bad, you know all of that. And they want to, and the main thing is they want to stick with you through all of it. Didn't matter if we were on good times or bad times. You were still there for them, you know or they're still there for you. You value that deep, strong connection with another person and people in your friend group. You know, you like real fucking friends who are like that. No matter how much time has passed, you could still, tell jokes. You could do all kind of things. You know, and you value, getting down too. But that comes with being a more, willful or more gutsy person. You know, in that kind of way. A little more, subtle, but not really subtle because actions are being taken. You're not sitting on your ass. You might be a little bit, you might cry a little bit from time to time to yourself, but you don't, project that out to the world. You rather project, aggression and shit towards, things, you know. But that's what you value. You value a deep connection, and that's why you do get aggressive every once in a while, or more, pushy sometimes. Because you've seen somebody a certain way. You put your time and energy into something. Maybe they didn't realize that fuck with them that much, and then they ain't, doing things the way you want them to, and you just hurt by it. So then you lash out, or you let them know that you're greatly offended about what, they've done, the actions that they've taken. Um, but that's what you value. Now, a Sagittarius in the second house, you value excitement, fun, not doing the same shit all the time. You value that, you know, I've done this. I don't want to keep doing this type of thing. I want to fuck with these type of people now. I want to experience what that's like. Okay, I didn't like that. We'll keep that in mind. Maybe we'll go back to that type of thing later on. Maybe I wasn't ready for that thing at that point in time in my life. So I'll go over here and I'll try this thing out, and I'll try doing this, see if that makes me fulfills my fun in what I'm trying to see. I like to tell people how it is, how I feel about what I see, and if I don't like it, I'm gonna tell you exactly like it is. I want to be one that people can, come to when I'm having fun, and be a part of it. As long as they ain't bringing shit down, as long as they ain't, turning shit the fuck down for everybody else, and they're there to have fun too, it's cool. But if they're doing shit like that, I'll let them know that they can't be there and they should probably get the fuck away. Because I came here to, have fun and live life and do this. You'll try different things out. You'll do different, all kind of different things. You're an opportunist. You seize the opportunity in all kind of ways, not just sexually, but other ways too. I want to make sure I can, do this, go to this type of thing. I want to go to this kind of event because it's fun, and I want to. I'll, go there and do that, and then I'll, do other things. You know, and anything that I want to seek and find out about, I'm gonna do it, and I ain't gonna wait to do it. I'm gonna do it whenever the fuck I, you know, need to do it, because there's no time like now, and we don't have time to waste right now. That's no, you know, we can't do that. We have to, and you might be impatient sometimes, but value, you value being around different kinds of people because you're an understanding person too. You know, because you've been around these people and these people and these people, you know, you try to anyways. But then you like learn throughout life that, I as a person that's Sagittarius, who values, interactions with people, fun interactions with people, um, these people don't take to me very well because they don't like the way I, do things. So I can, keep them at a distance, or limit my time with those type of people because I understand who I am and I understand who they might be, or like the type of person, mostly the type of person, because you're like I said, you're one that is like not about the social shit, and like if you know that there's other people out there who really fuck with what you got going on, you're gonna go to that, you know. But you would still try to get to know somebody and a little bit, because you are a little bit interested in understanding that way of like you know but you won't stay long, and if it ain't like, basically, if it ain't fun enough for you, or you ain't fucking with it enough, you're like, sorry man, or sorry girl, I'm not gonna fuck with this too much because it seems kind of drab, seems kind of not what I like to do. I'm gonna go and do something else, you know and you're quick to get to something else. That's not a bad thing, for you. Other people um might see it as you could seem unstable at times, maybe, as far as you ain't gonna value the material things and shit that much. You value, bringing fun and excitement to other people. People who are fun and exciting themselves, who can, make a situation, more fun, more lively for you. Um, you know, that's the type of person you are. Um, and if, they can't do that, then, no hard feelings, but I ain't sticking around. You know, I got better things to see and, I, no time to waste. Um, and like I said, you don't value the things, and like people might even give you things and stuff, but you're like, oh, you don't have to, the time we spend together, and the things that we do together, that matters more, but you do, like that. And then you're also, generous too every once in a while. You don't want to see another person around you not having fun, because then that brings shit down for you, because you just can't, like, because you see things a lot and you seek a lot of things, and then you see somebody around you in your area who's like down, and you're like, what's, wrong with you? And then they might be like, oh, I need this, but I don't have this, and you might have that, and you're like, you know what, here, man, have this. I don't need it. You need it, and I don't want to see you, down and crying about shit. I don't need you bringing this, these vibes out. So here's this. So you don't have to, cry and bitch about things no more. We can, move forward, you know, because you're a forward, thinker too. Um, but, and you don't really, and you value conversations, but not the ones that are too, in depth about, specific, intellectual type of concepts or anything. Sometimes you are, but so, most of the time you're just trying to, have fun and, that type of thing. But the Capricorn, they value their, stability too. They value discipline, sticking to what they say they're going to do and doing it. People who are like that. You said you were going to do this and become like this. You will even hold your friends to that, who said they were going to do that. So then you're going to do that. You're going to tell them. You're going to be up their ass a little bit and be like, hey, you said you were going to do this, so do this. But you're going to also, before you even fucking do that, that you have to be that one too. You have to be that yourself first. And this as an introvert, red. You're like, okay, I'm the one that's disciplined. I'm the one who's, making sure I do what I say I'm going to do every day. I'm going to do it, to the best of my ability, and I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to have that sense of urgency too. I have to do that shit now too. I have to make sure my money's right, make sure my, mind is, me. I don't like to fuck around too much. I have to make sure I have, my career together. So when people look at me, they're seeing me for, a guy who, works hard at his job and knows about money and knows where to, keep his shit, you know, knows how to cut people off, who are, fucking around too much. You know, you value yourself in that way. You know, I don't got time for the, tomfoolery, you know. Now, maybe once I have all my shit together, I can, have fun a little bit. But you're an earth sign, so you like to be one who's seen and can be, confided in, because this is Saturn energy. We like to call this daddy energy. Bitches call it that too. You like people who want to come to you for things, but you always like to make sure you have your shit together too. You ain't gonna like even think about, any of that shit until you have your shit together completely. House, cars, finances are in order to, whatever. You are working at a job and you have, that type of, standing within whatever business or whatever you're trying to run. Maybe you have your own business and your business is doing great. You know, you want to be on like that type of, good foundation, and you value that about yourself, sticking to, that being disciplined, setting, limitations, cutting yourself off from shit, you know, you like people who are like that too, because then it gives you a sense of security too. I'm not the only one out here that um ain't fucking around. I can then, come to that person too, because, you could get, frustrated at times because you think everybody fucks around too much. But then there's another person that's, disciplined, sticking to what they got to do. And you're like, okay, I can go to this person and ask them about some things, you know, because you value people who, stick to what they say they're going to do and do it, before anything else. Now, Aquarius, you value people who, can think a little bit, who are intellectual too, right? Who like to conversate with other people and don't like to, dodge. If they have a question on their mind, it's cool, to question things and then come up with ideas to, maybe fix something that you see is wrong, or enlighten other people to, what you might have, came up with, or been looking into that other people might not have been looking into, because they think it's just, maybe not that it's not worth looking into, but it's not like that pressing, but to you it is, and you continue to, like, think about those type of things. You value people who, think outside the box a little bit, because to you, those people and you yourself are people who, like, eventually, like, change things for, like, people in general, in a good way, typically, you want to bring this to light about things, and, talk to people about it, and, maybe make a organization that fights against whatever you're, trying to, say is, wrong in society or wrong in the world, or you're trying to fix something, because this is fixed wind, right? You're trying to, get to the bottom of something that, people have questioned for a while, and you're the one trying to, figure that shit out with your friends, and people who are like-minded and are also intelligent like you are. And you value those type of connections with people, smart people who can, give, great, detailed, great information about a certain topic that you are interested in yourself. If you're not interested in, you ain't gonna, stick around. You're just gonna be like, okay, you're a different kind of person. We can probably just be, acquaintances, or, something. And you do that too, because you're a wind sign, right? Um, but you do value, people who, think a little bit outside the box, and people who, like I said, question things a little bit, and it's not wrong to question things. It's fine to have questions about shit. But then there's certain things that don't need to be questioned, and you also know that if you're like me, you know, you know, um, it's more towards, ideas about, society, where can we go with this type of technology? Where can we go with this type of social media? Where can we go with this type of, um, you know, where are we going as people? Um, we want to, like, bring things back. We want to look into, getting information to people this way, all kind of stuff. You know, every person is different who has that sign, right? But um, you value that type of thing. Conversations and people who, are gonna, think a little bit for themselves more, and not, be cost to the crowd a lot. You know, now you like to pick their brain apart a little more, and somebody who's like, you already know is gonna, like, talk about, certain things, and you just like, I know how you are. You're a person that likes to do this and that, um but that's that person. um Now, Pisces values people who are, creative because they themselves are creative and they like to, seize opportunities as well. How can we make this moment better? We feel kind of like, down right now, or we feel like we need something better for ourselves, as a friend group, or you do as an individual because you're a Pisces, right? I want to, turn this situation from a curse to a blessing, or make something, better happen. So you're gonna, find creative ways to do that. We don't have to think too much. We don't have to um, even have things. We just have to, creatively come up with a way to, not feel so down. Maybe we're gonna go do something exciting, um, like go to the movies, or we're gonna go see, we're gonna go to the art. We're gonna create our own art. We're gonna make our own art, and we're gonna, present it to people at a art show. We're gonna create some music together, or I'm gonna do that. You know, you value those type of things because to you, maybe there wasn't a lot of um, like logical thought in it, or maybe you didn't need a lot of money. You just needed to go out and do something. Maybe you value those like interesting things that people do, like people who like make shit out of like things in nature. Like they took a lot of sticks and they built like a house, or something that um helps people out, and it's just like an interesting work of art, and you're like, damn, you just take note of that, and you're like, damn, you had to be creative. You must have been bored and just was like, I want to make this right now. You take note of shit like that. you know and I also like to have compassion for other people who might be down and out, and you want to like change their emotions from a negative to a positive. If you see a way that you can help them out, because again, you like to seize the opportunity, and be that one that's like, hey, if you are going through this right now, let me do this for you. And you're gonna help them out in a way that's, and they'll remember you too, because you were, creative about the way you, change them, or transform them a little bit, because this is mutable water. So you're taking something and you're changing it, from a negative to a positive. Sometimes, you're trying to, do the opposite if you're like not so cool, but um, typically you want to do that, you know, get somebody from a, negative state to a positive state, emotionally. Because in life, you like, it's true that we have, negative moments, but then you can change that into a positive. It's not going to be that way forever. Nothing's forever. Um, you're gonna come on bad times, but then you're gonna come on good times, and you're gonna be the one. You like to be that one who is like that. Then people value you for that, and then you value people who are also like that, and can show compassion to other people, and understand that it's not just them, it's not just you going through something. It could also be other people going through things too, and that I have pain and other people have pain too, and you want to be the one to acknowledge that in somebody else, and like help, and helping them is helping you too, that type of deal. And then you're also like a creative person, so you value that too. So this was the second house, and people who have the sun in the second house. Each sign did things differently, and then you're seen for being a certain person that values that about yourself. You could be very egotistical about that, and like you might even you know judge people a little bit. I value this, but you don't value it. You might not judge them, but you'd be like, less willing to, maybe interact or be friends with the person, or like surround yourself with that type of person. And that's a good thing, for you. You know, So, um, if you have that placement, watch this video and, figure out where you are. But be cool on the corner.